Well, last week, there was no sermon, right? Except there was. I produced a short 5-minute version of what I would have preached online, and no, I'm not going to do that this week. Condense it to 5 minutes. You can go online. You can watch any of our previous sermons online. In fact, people are watching right now online because we live stream everything and record it. But we are in the Sermon on the Mount. We've barely even gotten into it. In fact, 2 weeks ago when we started this sermon series, we weren't talking in the Sermon on the Mount. We were preaching something else to talk about the kingdom of heaven. But as I've been dwelling on this and sort of living into the Sermon on the Mount as I've been looking at this, it takes me back to creation, and it often does. No, that doesn't mean this is going to be a longer sermon because I'm going to preach from the beginning. But let's go back to Genesis for a moment. God created, and it was good. God created everything, and it was good. He created you and me and calls us good humans. We're called good from the beginning. And that's an important thing to remember as we look at Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount today, because he's going to be talking about how we treat one another. And why does that matter? It's because God created us in his image, and he cares about us, and he loves us. And the fact that he took that time to create humans in his image is very important. He didn't create the trees, the rocks, or the animals in his image. He created us, humans, men and women, in his image. Now, just so we have a clear head about this, we didn't get our own day of creation, right? We share our day of creation with other animals. But nobody else is created in the image of God. It's interesting then if you jump to Exodus 20 and you read the 10 Commandments. God says don't create an image of anything and worship it. Part of that would be don't create an image of God and worship it. The only time when an image of God really is created is, first of all, Jesus Christ, but that goes a little bit deeper than simply an image. And second of all, the only time that we actually get permission to create an image of God as humans is procreation, when we create another human. And even then, there's a lot of processes involved, and God's really involved in that process. We just kind of kick it off and finish the process in many ways. Now, for those of you that go through pregnancy, I understand it's a little deeper than that. So I'm not shortchanging that. But that's the only time we really get to create an image-bearing thing, a human. And that's very important in what we get at today in our text from the Sermon on the Mount. We bear the image of God, and we better treat each other well as a result. The point of our sermon series thus far has been that kingdom people, we'll talk about that term again, but kingdom people see the world like Jesus, and they act like it. Today we add to that kingdom people see God's image in others, and they act like it. That's where we're going. And since we didn't get to talk about it last week, we're going to look at Matthew 5. You can look at that right now. I'll get there in a moment. But this is all the Sermon on the Mount. We're looking at just a portion of it right now over the next few weeks. Matthew chapters 5 through chapter 7, just a few verses in Matthew, comprise this rather remarkable message from Jesus, which is really the core of it all. The Sermon on the Mount, when you look at it, it starts with these 9 Beatitudes. We're only looking at 3 over the next couple weeks. Those 9 Beatitudes, you read, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Today, blessed are the peacemakers. And I don't know about you, but for years I looked at those and I thought, well, okay, so one person is meek, and one person is a peacemaker, and one person is one who's poor in spirit, but that's not at all what the list is. The list is talking about one person. The whole list. It's one kingdom person. They're all 9 qualities that one person in the kingdom should ideally have. You're not just one meek person and then another person in church is one who hungers and thirsts for righteousness. No, you should be one person who wants all of that or encompasses all of that. But the other thing about it is they're unnatural without Jesus. You can look at some of those character traits and think, well, that seems like, somebody could have certain character traits and somebody might not naturally. But no, they're really unnatural to really fulfill these and meet up with them without Jesus. They also, for Jesus' purposes, function almost like 9 sermon points. It's like he's giving you a 9-point sermon in the Sermon on the Mount. These give headings, and he fills in those headings as the Sermon on the Mount progresses. They're unnatural qualities. They make one whole kingdom person, and they tell us about what it means and how we should live in the kingdom of heaven and be kingdom people now, and then what it will look like as we live into that in the future for kingdom people. As you also look at the Sermon on the Mount, you will see 3 character sets. You really see this since we're sticking with the book of Matthew. You really see them through the book of Matthew. You see the disciples. And when we run into them in the Sermon on the Mount, the very first 2 verses, Jesus is teaching his disciples. It says, we shouldn't understand that immediately as the 12 disciples right away. And the reason we can say that is Matthew, his disciple, doesn't get called as a disciple until chapter 9. So by chapter 5, you don't have the 12 pulled together. What we should understand that as is somebody who follows Jesus Christ, somebody who said, I'm in with Jesus. Those are disciples. And that's the main crowd that Jesus is talking to in the Sermon on the Mount. For those people, Jesus is teaching what it means to be a kingdom person. Okay, you've made the decision to follow Jesus. This is what it means to follow me, to live this way. Then you run into the crowd. And throughout the book of Matthew, by this point, the crowd is fairly neutral in their stance. They're not disciples. They're not counted among that group of people. They're the people listening in. And for those people, Jesus is essentially giving an invitation. This is kingdom life. I'm teaching these guys. You can be a part of this. There's an invitation being made. And, of course, the crowd, if you read the rest of Matthew, the crowd turns eventually. Those that aren't counted among disciples, they turn, and they're the ones yelling, crucify, by the end. So they're no longer neutral by the end of the book. You have a third set. You can see it on the screen, the religious leaders. For these people, they are opposing Jesus and his teaching. Jesus uses them as examples of how not to behave, how not to act, how not to be, because everything looks good on the outside, but on the inside it doesn't look great. Their motives are wrong. Their heart is not in the right place, even though things look ritually okay. Those are the 3 crowds. Jesus is teaching, he's inviting, or people are opposing him. Now let's look at these Beatitudes now that we've gotten our heads into the Sermon on the Mount here. He's talking directly to his disciples. This is Matthew chapter 5. We're going to start at verse 3, and we're going to read all the Beatitudes. Let's just hear them all, even though we're only covering 3 over the next few weeks. This is Jesus speaking. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." It's easy when we look at those Beatitudes to skip past probably the most important word and look at the content of each one. We look and we say, I wonder what the poor in spirit really are, and why is theirs the kingdom of heaven? Why are the peacemakers sons of God? Well, wait a minute. Go back to that first word, blessed. And there you found a key to understanding what Jesus is saying. It's striking because that's really how Jesus sort of spins these things. These unnatural qualities that in a lot of ways look upside down in our world, but when you get down to it, that's the world right side up, is what Jesus is presenting. This is what it's supposed to be. Makarioi The New Testament was written in Greek. Matthew was written in Greek. Makarioi is the Greek word used. Blessed. If you look around in the rest of the New Testament, you'll find that word here and there. And do you know how it gets translated? Blessed. Doesn't give us a ton of help. Sometimes fortunate, other times happy. But there's not a lot of help that you get. When you look into that word, you uncover that word. Scholar David Wilkins points out that there's a quality to the word, first of all. There's a now and then a future quality. You're blessed now, but you're blessed in the future as well. Because these qualities that are unnatural, except as found in Jesus, they're sort of like a gift in one sense to kingdom people, but they're also a result of living as a kingdom person. You grow in them as you live them, but in many ways they're bestowed upon you as somebody who follows Jesus Christ. So there's a now and a future quality. That's why blessed works so well. You can see again on the screen, pastor, author Darrell Johnson, he gives the best, I think, definition for this. And he says, go back to the boy bands of the late 90s and you found it in sync. Blessed means in sync in many ways. You're in line with, you're in sync with God and God's heart if you're poor in spirit, if you mourn, if you're a peacemaker, if you're insulted because of me. You're in sync. I think that hits it. An example you could use, don't take this too far, but maybe like the moon as it reflects the light of the sun. So it's in sync with what the sun is doing. It broadcasts that light in a dark place. And part of the hope is that broadcasting that light would, in fact, bring people into that light. You can understand it that way. You're in sync. Kingdom people reflect the qualities of the kingdom of heaven, even now, even if it doesn't fully match the surroundings of the world they live in. There you have it. Now, the kingdom, these Beatitudes, the 9 Beatitudes, are not, well, they're divided into threes if you want to do it one way. Scholars try all kinds of different ways to divide them, and it seems fairly unnatural. Scott McKnight, scholar, has pointed out that you can helpfully, he's not saying this is the way it has to be, but he says you can helpfully look at them in threes. And I think he's done a good job. He points out that the first 3, poor in spirit, those who mourn, and the meek really is about humility when you get down to it. The next 3 really relate to justice, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful and the pure in heart. And then the 3 we're focusing on are about peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the persecuted, and blessed are you when you're insulted because of me, or when people insult you. We're focusing on peacemakers for 2 weeks. There's a reason for that. I think it's a big deal. Peacemakers versus peacekeepers is our topic for next week. And let's just have a family moment here for just a second. We have a spiritual gift, as I've lived with you. Our spiritual gift, we are peacekeepers. That's our spiritual gift. Our spiritual gift should be peacemakers. Next week, we're going to talk about that. Keep that in mind. Peacemaker versus peacekeeper. Today, I just want to talk about peace itself and finding it. And so let's look back at our beatitude. Go to verse 9. It says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. I think right there, if Jesus is using this as one of his 9 points that tell you about what a kingdom person is supposed to be, and he expounds on that throughout one of the core key things that we read from the mouth of Jesus, we can deduce that peace is important. It's very important to God. You can see it right there. And you can see it even further because look at the family connection that's made. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children. Sons is the original. By implication, I don't think it excludes daughters of God. So we'll stick with children right now. But that indicates a close relationship. If somebody was called a son in Jesus' day, it means you're on the same team. It means you're on about the same things. You're on the same side about something. There's that close camaraderie. You're in sync, right? That's why that blessed term makes so much sense. Peace is important for the children because it's important for the father. And if we're on about peace, we're on about the same thing. We're in sync. We're in line with. In our day, dictionary.com defines peace as a state of mutual harmony, between people or groups, especially in personal relations. And we'll limit it to interpersonal relations, not between states, and all that kind of thing. Mutual harmony between people or groups. And I think we often understand that as simply being no ripples in the water, right? That everything's just calm. Whether or not we've dealt with any underlying issues, that it seems calm. But I think that's an incomplete understanding of peace. I think if you look back biblically, Old Testament, you'd see the word shalom, New Testament, eirene. Peace would bring with it the connotation of things being right and things being whole or reconciled. That's what they would get at. It's in fact wishing the highest good on somebody, not just no trouble going forward. That's different than just no ripples on the water. That's different than just things just looking calm around you. It's in fact making sure things are right, because without making sure things are right between people, then you have at that point the classic elephant in the room, don't you? Or if you want to put it in better terms, you have the situation of two kids in the backseat of the car on a road trip, right? You draw a line down the middle of the road trip when things get bad, and you really haven't changed the situation, right? You've made it more tenuous, frankly. It only takes not just a finger crossing the line, but the threat of a finger crossing the line, doesn't it? Or the kid turning a la, 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 and all of a sudden peace is broken. It's disturbed. That wasn't peace, was it? It looked like it, but you never dealt with the underlying issue. Now, I can't tell you what the underlying issue is between siblings, because a lot of time it's just siblings, right? That's what they do. So peace has to be something more. There has to be a wholeness and a completeness and a reconciliation about it, and a rightness, almost a justification about things, if you will. And Jesus gives us examples. We'll look at a couple of those today of what he means by peace. He talks throughout the sermon about, he uses examples as murder, anger, lawsuits, hate and love, forgiveness, mercy. We're not going to cover all those, but they all relate to peace, and also to who is the blessed and who follows through with that. When we're synchronized with the kingdom of heaven, we will desire peace and will be counted among the blessed. And I think the first thing about that is we need to desire peace. That's why I've said we need to see the world like Jesus, first and foremost. At the heart of it all, one of the things that's so important to God is peace. We read it this morning in Ephesians. It's a powerful passage that God made peace through Jesus Christ. A seemingly irreconcilable situation was reconciled. Peace, if you will, was found. It's in fact the word it uses. We have to intend to be people of peace in the first place if we're ever going to achieve that. We have to intend that by seeing the world like Jesus and saying, yes, I'm going to align my heart with the heart of Jesus Christ and see the world that way. Peace is a part of Jesus' heart. It's his desire, and until you get Jesus and understand Jesus, you won't have peace, nor will you be one who brings peace. So we have to desire it in the first place. Maybe even internally first, I don't know, but we have to desire peace. Years ago, I remember reading Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I don't know if anybody else has read it, but I'm going to disappoint you. I'm not a Jane Austen fan. I find her boring. But I heard a what over here. I'm sorry. She's a brilliant author, isn't she? Brilliant author. And it's interesting to read these ballroom scenes, or if you watch the movie, to watch the ballroom scenes and these moments where there's this high society, and her brilliance comes out in those moments as you read her work. Because what was the goal in those ballroom scenes? Status, right? And insults. Those are the things. That was the way to achieve the goal. So people would try and insult each other in that day and age in the most creative, witty way possible for which you would win. So somebody else could not come back and outdo you in their insult. And brilliantly written. And those insults, what do? What do insults do? They elevate one person and they lower another person, don't they? And in some cases, they seem like minor offenses. But if you look at Jesus' words, and turn to Matthew 5:21 now, if you look at Jesus' words, what we might call minor, he calls major problems. He does, because we look at Matthew 5:21 through 22, and we discover God loves people. And you should too. He loves them a lot, and you should too. And here's how we know this. 21, it says, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. These are powerful words. Let's start with the first thing. You have heard it said, Jesus says, I say to you. What he is not doing is redoing the law. He's in fact restating it in many cases. He's saying, this is the law, you know that, but let me correct your understanding of the law. Let's get behind the law. What is it really doing? Why is it really there? What's the issue behind this all? That's what Jesus is doing. Let me correct the way you get the law. And he says something that I think stands out to us. Even if you're angry with a brother or sister, not just if you've murdered them, even if you're angry, you've walked into dangerous territory. And this is tough stuff. When I was a hospital chaplain years ago, I remember being confronted with the question in a group setting, what is the function of anger? And I'm not a psychology person, and so a question like that short circuits my brain. I had no answer. I was like, I don't know. What's the function of anger? Well, now through practical experience and people helping me along the way, I have figured out that anger, often what we call anger, is not always anger, first of all. We often call all kinds of emotions anger. Socially speaking, especially men, we're kind of allowed to be angry, and that's about it. It's changing a little bit, but we often mask other emotions as anger. Sadness, depression, whatever it might be. We mask those things. Fear as anger. So Jesus isn't talking about those kinds of things. Anger usually comes out, in my understanding, true anger, more in cases where you're actually physically threatened in some way. Right? If I'm driving and somebody cuts me off in traffic and then slams on the brake really quickly, there might be some anger there. There's also a lot of other emotions, but there might be angry that they threatened me or the people in my car, whether intentionally or not. Or the other way around, if somebody, if almost runs into me from behind or whatever, you get the idea. But I think what Jesus is not getting at is simply the emotional response, but what you're about to do with that response and who you're about to aim it at. And I don't want to water down what he says, but I think that's where he goes with the text if you look at it. So he says, anybody who says raka, which is fool, idiot, it's a word of contempt. In fact, Dallas Willard in his book, The Divine Conspiracy, points out that there's some belief that perhaps because it sounds kind of like the spitting noise, like you're working up something to spit, that adds to it, because spitting on someone in that day, not much different now, was considered a huge insult. So you've got that going on. It's this word of contempt. This is nearly a 4-letter word. So if you say that to somebody, you idiot, you fool, Jesus says you should go before the Supreme Court. That's the translation. The Sanhedrin, the highest court in the land. If you say that seems like a minor offense for a pretty major consequence, doesn't it? I mean, this was not uncommon for people to say this in Jesus' day. But Jesus says if you say that, guess what? You're in trouble. And let's think it through. You see, we say fool and we don't think that much of it. But what that means in Jesus' day is somebody who has turned their back on God ultimately, and ultimately on the community of God's people, and they're following their own wisdom. Something like Proverbs 18:2. It says, fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. And all throughout Old Testament, you can find different ways that fools rely on their own judgment and thoughts and think they are higher than everybody else, including God. So when you call somebody this, you're saying you're not even part of the community. You don't even follow God. You're worthless. Jesus goes on, he says, anybody who says, you fool. Now he's kind of picking up a different crowd of people because he's using it uses a Greek word, more, from which we get moron. There you go. Anybody who says, you fool, and I think it gets a little we use moron. I think, again, this is in the 4-letter word territory. Anybody who does that should be thrown into the fires of hell. Did you catch that? That's steeper all of a sudden. They should be thrown into Gehenna. It says Gehenna was a valley on the south side of Jerusalem. What was the garbage dump? It was constantly on fire because that's where they burned their trash. During the late Old Testament time into the as the New Testament was approaching that time period, Gehenna comes to be known as an idiom of saying that final punishment. What happens when you die and you are separated from God? Gehenna, the fires of hell. That's what Jesus means. Look, if you get to that point of treating another human that way, you're not calling them a fool. You really are the fool who is separated from God at that point. I mean, this is powerful stuff. Dallas Willard again, The Divine Conspiracy, he says, really what Jesus is doing is taking us on a progression from outward to inward. Murder, anger, and then what's worse than anger? Contempt for another human being. It goes out to in, exterior to interior, and a simple slight dishonors you, it dishonors the other, and it dishonors God, we discover. God loves people. You should too. That's what we learn. Going on, if you go to verse 23, it says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. So he says, be reconciled. Fix it while you have the chance. At the altar, if you're offering your gift at the altar, the only thing that could interrupt that moment of giving a gift was something ritually that superseded. If you didn't do something that needed to be done before you offered your gift, you could stop giving the gift, go take care of that, and then come back and give your gift. That was the law. Jesus is saying, here's something that should interrupt your gift giving. If you're out of sorts with a brother or sister, that should stop it. Because people being reconciled is more important than proper ritual, it turns out. Right worship is found in reconciliation. Jesus says that will stop the gift. Then you can come back once you've made that attempt, once you've reconciled things. And he says be reconciled sooner rather than later. This court example is most likely a Gentile example, not a Jewish example. And as they're going to court, he's saying, fix it before you get there. Because sometimes we want to water down what Jesus says. I don't know, people do that with the eye of the needle and things like that. Jesus is really saying something like this. If you don't fix it, there's a time limit. And if you don't fix it by the end of the time limit, guess what? You can't fix it. Because you can't pay the debt if you're stuck in prison not making money. It's impossible. That's what he's saying. Not that somehow you're going to be able to work at 10 cents a day making license plates or something. That's not what he's saying. He says you just can't do it at that point. There will come a day when you can't fix it. So don't. Don't let things fester, because this happens, doesn't it, in our relationships with one another? You know, I've talked to plenty of people over the years who have marriages like this, or relationships with one another, or boyfriend, girlfriend, or work relationship, whatever it is. And people will let 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not even huge things, but little things build up as a point of contention between them, and they fester over time. And when you don't fix it, you take a lot of little problems, you make it one really big problem, and it becomes very hard to fix. It's fixable, but it becomes very hard. Jesus says, don't let it fester, because there comes a point at which you can't fix this. Let me give a final thought on all this. There's a lot to take in, I know. The whole Sermon on the Mount is not just about not doing bad things. It's about being a kingdom person. It's about having the heart of God and then being the love of God in the world. That's what it's about. And if you call yourself a kingdom person, that is somebody who not only says, I accept Jesus Christ, but I follow Jesus Christ, and I'm going to align my heart with him, and I'm going to do what he calls me to do regardless. That's when you become a kingdom person. If you have that heart, or claim to have that heart, we represent the king in all that we do. When we were living in Colorado, at the last church I was serving, I made a hospital call, and I was leaving the hospital. It was a very slow road to get out. I was 2 cars behind. The car in front was going excessively slow. The car between was a company vehicle that I could clearly see the company logos placed on the side with the company phone number placed underneath that. It was an obvious company car. It was a hot day. Windows were open, mine included. And the company car vehicle was not satisfied with the speed at which the person in front of him was going. And man, was he yelling some things out the window. And wow, was his arm going, and certain fingers that ought not. And for 5, 6, 7 minutes, this is going on. And so we were stopped at a stoplight at one point where he's excessively yelling out the window in his company vehicle. So I had time to write down the phone number. And I got back to my office, and I said, look, I don't think this guy needs to be fired, but you probably should mention that he's driving a company vehicle and he wasn't acting like a company guy. That might be worth a mention. The lady on the other end was a little confused as to why I'd even bother, but it was worth doing, I think. If we have the heart of God, if we call ourselves kingdom people, we need to look the part too and act the part and be the part, in fact. I'm amazed at how many people drive company vehicles and don't act the part. We are representing the king. We need to do it right. That doesn't just mean looking the right part on the outside, but being the right part from the inside out. And it's interesting, as we finish this out, not all people who call themselves Christians, by the way, fit in the kingdom people category. And I want to point this out all across the country. There are people who have gone to church for years and years, or claimed Christianity for years and years, but they haven't even gotten to the point of being Christians. Because so often we've narrowed down what it means to be a churchgoer and what it means to be a Christian as simply morality. And the kingdom of God is far deeper than morality. It's not just looking the part. It's not just acting the part. It's being the part from the inside out. That Jesus Christ changes me, and I'm a servant of the king because of that. And then I'm a kingdom person. And so today, I have a few challenges, and the first one is, do you fit the blessed category? Are you, in fact, a kingdom person? Is it from the inside out, or is it just on the outside? Because if not, it's a great day to say yes to Jesus and say yes even further, that I want to be following you, not just accepting you. I want to follow you. I've challenged you over the last few weeks to read a gospel. Well, I would have challenged you last week, but you weren't here. To read a gospel, get to know the heart of Jesus. Understand him. Some of you have taken that challenge, and I appreciate that. I challenge you today to check your outlook on how you treat other people. If you claim to be a kingdom person, how does that look when you're at work, when you're at school? Are there things that are acceptable that Jesus would say, that's not a minor offense? That's a big deal, how you treated those people. We've all been guilty of it, myself included. We need to not just see other people in the image of God, but respond rightly towards them as people who God created in his image. Kingdom people see the world like Jesus and they act like it. Kingdom people see God's image in others. And guess what? They act like it. Let's pray. God, your words are sometimes hard. And Jesus Christ challenges us in the deepest and most difficult ways. And God, for those in this room that do not know you, pray that your Spirit would work right now. God, for those of us in the room who want to be kingdom people, but it's hard to step over the line, help us make that move. Help us get in sync with you, in line with you, and align our heart with your desires, with your loves, not just ours. And God, help us as we try and live out your heart's desire in this world, that we would treat those around us with love and with care, even when they don't treat us that way. God, that we would make peace rather than just keep it, that we would dig through the issues that need to be dug through, because you did that for us. You reconciled something that seemed irreconcilable. God, thank you for that. Help us accept that gift. Help us to live that gift. Help us to be kingdom people in all that we do and say, that we would act like it. Our God, we give ourselves to your care today. Amen.